Welcome back to Stormi Talks True Crime on my Girls Rock Productions channel, where I tell you some of the most heinous true crime stories throughout history. Remember to like the video and subscribe for more content like this. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about the disappearance and murder of Charlotte Grabby. This is a very graphic crime, so a lot of the details from the case and the trial are too gruesome for YouTube. For a more in-depth analysis on the crime, including these details and my personal takes on the case, check out my Patreon, linked in the description box and comments below. By subscribing to the silver tier, you would have access to the Stormi Talks True Crime, the Aftermath, as well as my ghost hunting videos once I get those started. Now, on to Murder on the Farm. Let's start by talking about our victim. Charlotte Grabby was born on January 31st, 1942 to Melvin and Margaret Gore, making her an Aquarius. She was born in Sullivan, Indiana. Not much is known about her childhood, but most of the Grabby wealth, including their 800-acre farm, was inherited by Charlotte from her parents. One thing that is known, she would meet her future husband, Fred Grabby, when she was 15. But it is not the romantic start you might believe. Her marriage to Grabby was not based in love, but more on force and control. Fred Grabby was born June 2nd, 1939, making him a Gemini. So he was just 3 years older than Charlotte when he would meet her. He was born in West Terre Haute, Indiana. What started out as an innocent date between two teenagers would take a dark turn. Fred would SA young Charlotte, resulting in her getting pregnant in a shotgun wedding. They would have their son Jeffrey in 1958 and their daughter Jenny the following year, but their marriage would be riddled with violence. What would actually bring about their first divorce in 1961 wasn't the violence. It was the infidelity. Charlotte would catch Fred cheating. This separation wouldn't last long because they would reconcile and get remarried in 1962. It's after the second marriage that they would move to Marshall, Illinois. The violence would carry on throughout the second marriage as well. Fred was a massive 6'4", 280-pound man, and Charlotte was petite and less than half his weight. Fred had no issues beating up on Charlotte or their son Jeffrey. Jeffrey and Jenny would take Charlotte's side in every argument as well. Another thing that didn't change throughout the second marriage was Fred's wandering eye. Finally, in 1981, Charlotte would have enough. Fred moved out to a cabin on the other side of their property, and Jeffrey and his wife moved in with Charlotte. Soon after this, she would press charges against him after he assaulted her in the cabin when she was trying to get some of the furniture. She was so scared that she wasn't going to survive this divorce that she would actually tell her children that if she doesn't come home, look into Fred. That day would come on July 24th, 1981. While Charlotte was a petite woman, she was still very hands-on when it came to the farm. On July 24th, she went out to work on the farm in the soybean field, driving the tractor. That evening, when she didn't return home and no one had heard from her, Jeffrey and Jenny began to panic. They would go over to the farm and found the tractor in front of the machine shed and Charlotte's lunch still sitting on the tire. Jenny would immediately go home and report her mother missing. One of the first people the cops would question was obviously Fred. Now, at this time, Fred's new main squeeze was a 24-year-old curly-haired blonde bartender named Vicky McAllister. This was actually the affair that would break up the marriage. Fred stated that he did see Charlotte and quarreled with her that afternoon, but she drove off after that. He also would tell investigators that the last time he saw her, she was driving towards the interstate. Charlotte's car would be found just across the Indiana-Illinois border in her hometown of Terre Haute a few days later. Investigators couldn't really find any blood or signs of foul play, but they did find a handgun under the seat. One of Charlotte's friends would come forward to state that she had actually seen Fred heading towards Terry Holt in his truck, followed by a young blonde woman with curly hair in Charlotte's car, completely contradicting Fred's story. Police would also find out about a safety box that Charlotte owned at a local bank. In the box were some handwritten notes written just 10 days before she went missing. These notes stated that she believed that Fred was stealing farm equipment and how she didn't think she was going to survive the divorce. She would also write that she feared Fred and his business partner, Dave Kessler. When the investigators talked to Kessler, he stated that Fred was with him on the evening that Charlotte disappeared. At Jeff and Jenny's request, Fred and Vicky were brought in before a grand jury, but they invoked their Fifth Amendment rights. Fred even refused to take a lie detector test when asked by Jenny. The case would go cold for 3 years, and Jenny and her husband would offer a $25,000 reward to anyone who could come forward with new information. The case would break after Jenny had hired a private investigator, Charles Pearson. After going through the known evidence, Pearson would decide to follow the clue of the curly-haired blonde woman driving Charlotte's car. Like everyone else involved, he immediately suspected that this was Vicky McAllister. Through investigation, Pearson found out that Fred and Vicky had since broken up and that she was now living in West Terre Haute. Pearson knew that Vicky liked two things, beer and pool, so he started hanging out at the local bars in the area. He would eventually run into her and they would become friendly. When Pearson finally admitted to her who he was, she broke down. It was obvious to Pearson that she had been wanting to get this off her chest for some time, and she was more than ready to come clean. Vicky admitted that she was the woman driving Charlotte's car that day, but that wasn't the whole story she would tell him. She would tell him all of the gruesome details of what happened that night, as well as the next day. The story would make McAllister visibly ill every time she told it. Now the full story that would be told is going to be over on my Patreon, again because it is extremely horrific. If you want to hear the entirety of what Fred did to Charlotte Grabby, the link to my Patreon is in the description box and comments below. But Vicky would tell Pearson and the authorities and 2 juries that she and Fred Grabby were in the machine shed that day to get some 55-gallon metal barrels for farm work. As they were loading these barrels into his truck, they heard Charlotte coming up on her tractor. Fred told Vicky to go hide behind another tractor in the shed. While she was hiding, she would witness an argument between Charlotte and Fred that ended in Fred unaliving Charlotte. He would then stuff her body into one of the 55-gallon barrels and loaded it into his truck. Grabby then would instruct Vicky to follow him in Charlotte's car, driving over to Terre Haute, Indiana, across state lines. They would dump her car outside a bar and drove back to Grabby's farm. When back on the farm, they would park on the bank of the Wabash River. This is when Fred would unload the barrel containing Charlotte's body and placed it near a maple tree. This is when he would fill the barrel with diesel fuel up until it covered her entire body. He then lit it on fire. They would sit and watch the body and barrel slowly burn there on the riverbank all night long. When they heard the search party the next morning, they would put the fire out, and Fred loaded the drum back in his truck and headed back to Vicky's house. That night, they went back to the same spot and started the fire, and again letting it burn through the entire night. After putting it out, this time Fred would roll the barrel into the river. The only piece of Charlotte's body remaining was her skull. Fred would toss it into the river after making the comment that it would make good fish bait. Now, Vicky's confession wouldn't be enough in a court of law, as it would be her word against Fred's with no body, barrel, or murder weapon. And remember, at this point, Charlotte is still only a missing person. Well, at this time, there was a new sheriff in town. Dan Crumrin decided that he would try to see if the maple tree that was still standing at the burn site could be used to prove Vicky's story. Crumrin would contact the University of Illinois for help, and this is when plant biologist Eugene Himmelich and organic chemist Donald Dickerson would get involved. These men would take samples from the maple tree and, with their expertise, were able to prove that diesel fuel was burned right where Vicky said it was around the time of Charlotte's disappearance. This evidence would be enough to convict Fred Graby. Graby would be convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. And that's where the story should have ended. But the story is far from over. During the trial, Fred was being supported by his newest fling, Barbara Graham, who was a twice-divorced mother of 3. He even bought her a mink coat, which she would wear every day to the trial to torment the family members. Now, this woman was either nuts or brainwashed, because just a few weeks after Graby's conviction, while he was being held in county jail, Barbara Graham attempted to break him out. She would show up at the jail and told Deputy Sheriff Mike Polson that she wanted to give Fred a love note. When Polson opened the door, Barbara would fire 5 shots, with one hitting Polson in the leg. She then hovered over him, saying, "Don't make me kill you." In the end, Graham's attempt was unsuccessful, and she was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the crime. The judge in her trial was actually convinced that Fred had planned the whole thing from behind bars. Then, just 2 months later, both the Graby home and the nearby home belonging to Jeff burned to the ground. It was determined by fire marshals to be arson. Investigators suspected that Fred was behind it, but since he was already serving a life sentence, they had no way to prove it. During this whole time, Fred's lawyer had been filing for appeal, and they would get his conviction overturned on a technicality. Now, by this time, Vicki McAllister was given the $25,000 reward from Jenny, and so she was living a new life under a different name. She would come back to Clark County to testify again. There was a hiccup in the second trial, you see. Jeffrey would go missing a month before the trial began. He was on a business trip to California when his family members would lose contact with him. The judge would allow his wife, Cindy, to testify on his behalf. Even without Jeff's testimony, Fred was convicted again, but this time the sentence was just 75 years, which, considering the crime, I personally think the first sentence fit better. Because in June of 2022, Fred would be released from prison after only serving 37 years. 1 month after the trial, Jeff's body was found floating in the water at Seal Beach in California. He was shot 3 times, and there was an anchor used to weigh down the body. Fred denies being involved, but I'm not sure I really believe that. Vicki relocated under another name, and she still lives in fear of Fred finding her to this day. Well, that concludes this week's episode of Stormi Talks True Crime. Feel free to leave comments on this story below or suggestions of other stories you would like to see. Don't forget to check out some of my other playlists while you are here. On Stormi Teaches Music, I release a cover video on Mondays at 6 p.m. Eastern, and a video of me teaching the song covered on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. You can catch the live stream of the lesson on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Eastern on my Patreon. On the Stormi Does Art playlist, I have some partial videos of the live stream you can get on my Patreon for the gold tier or higher. These streams are daily at 1 p.m. Eastern. There is a link to my Patreon in the description box and comments below. Finally, check out Stormi Tells Ghost Stories, where I talk about haunted cities around the world. These videos are posted Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. For anyone who wants to make a one-time donation to the channel to help keep it running while I'm trying to build my audience, there is a QR code to my Venmo and CashApp on the screen. There is also a link to both in the description box and comments below. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons on your way out, and I will see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Until then, stay safe and have a great week.